that's great. The only things that concern me, you mentioned the Bears' defense, which I think because of their injuries sort of pushes them down, and the fact that this could be a shootout towards sort of a low DST1, if anything. But Eddie Lacy concerns me, and he concerns me a little bit because we didn't really see much from him. We didn't see much from him because the Packers pretty much abandoned any running game when they should have against a defense that was sitting there saying, we're going to stop the pass, go ahead and run against us. Now, I don't know how the Bears are going to play this, whether they're going to take that same approach, but I can tell you if they do and the Packers don't adjust, this should play right into the Bears' hands. Well, one way or another, this is a rivalry that, home field matters and it makes a difference, and I see the Bears winning this one as well in a close but high-scoring game.
Bears middle of the road. The run defense is rated middle of the road at ProFootballFocus.com. What they really stink at this year is special teams, and that's a little bit of a change to the norm. Moving on, the Buffalo Bills go to the Houston Texans. The Bills losing the game at home that only one person on our Monday night panel really called, and that was myself. Thank you very much. The Chargers are indeed for real, but that's a story for another time. We're talking about the Bills here, folks, and E.J. Manuel looked like he's not ready to be the guy when his team really needs him. What worked well for the Bills in previous weeks and their previous 2 wins, running the ball heavily and trying to limit the impact E.J. Manuel had on the game. Unfortunately, they got behind the 8 ball a little bit, and they needed Manuel to be there, and he wasn't there. The Texans' defense is that good. I know they lost last week. I know their offense kind of looked a little blah without Arian Foster, and that does present a problem because when it's Ryan Fitzpatrick versus E.J. Manuel, the quarterback level is pretty even. Alfred Blue had a decent game in relief of Arian Foster, but I think that this week at home, I don't think the Bills have enough offensive firepower to beat the Texans.
Well, here's what I think. This is going to be a low-scoring game. Both defenses are top 10. The Bills, for example, give up an average of 17.3 points allowed, which ranks them number 8. And the Texans give up 16.7 points allowed, which ranks them number 6th. So, when you're playing anyone in this game for fantasy football, what you're going to be looking for is yardage, and the difficulty is going to be, will you get a score? So with that in mind, let's talk about the Bills first. And amongst them, I would say, their best players are going to be Freddie Jackson, C.J. Spiller, and Sammy Watkins. Fred Jackson, right now, this is hard for me to say, but you got to like him ahead of C.J. Spiller. He's been playing better. He's been playing with more focus, and he's breaking some tackles, working on yards after getting the ball. So if you're going to play either one of them, it's likely going to be as flex plays with Freddie Jackson, maybe a low RB2. Sammy Watkins, look at him as a wide receiver 3 at best. Now for the Texans, Arian Foster needs to get back on the gridiron if they're going to win this game. I like Alfred Blue, but I don't know that he has exactly what Arian has, which is that silky smooth running, moving from left to right, and when he takes a hit, taking the least impact as he goes down. So if Arian can get back on the field, this is a game that the Texans definitely can win because their wide receivers have a very favorable matchup as the Bills' pass defense has struggled and is giving up the 10th most fantasy points allowed to opposing wide receiver. And that means Andre Johnson's a borderline wide receiver 1, and DeAndre Hopkins, who's been absolutely amazing by doing the most that he can possibly do with his catches, is a solid wide receiver 3. So I'm like you, Keith. I'm taking the Texans at home.
The Tennessee Titans travel to the Indianapolis Colts. The Titans looked absolutely lost last week, and you wonder what's really going on if Jake Locker is indeed going to last the entire season before we start getting a look at some other players, not ruling out Zach Mettenberger. You look at the Titans' offense, and Delaney Walker is their leading receiver. Yeah, so he's a good tight end, right? But he's got 9 more receptions than the next leader. That's not enough offensive firepower because Andrew Luck is probably you could. I hate to use the word terms like the best, but if he's not in the top 2 or 3 as far as individual quarterbacks, you know what I mean. A lot of quarterbacks are affected by their surroundings, their scheme, but one guy that seems to perform week after week after week, and his team doesn't always help him out, is Andrew Luck. and he's home. They've had a couple really tough losses this season so far. I'm picking them in this game at home.
Yeah, you know what? I am too, and I think the Colts are just going to run away with this game. They're going to control every facet of the game. You've got who I would say is the hottest quarterback in the league right now, Andrew Luck, who brings an array of weapons to the table, is the best fantasy pick amongst all the players in that game. You've got him hooked up with Ahmad Bradshaw, who's definitely an RB2 this week, who's getting a decent amount of yards and scoring, and Reggie Wayne and T.Y. Hilton. Now, Hilton ended up being a little nicked up in last weekend's game, and I personally think they just held him out, didn't want him to go back into a game that they were running away with. But in one half of football, he put up 80 yards. I mean, that's pretty amazing. So you get those playmakers out in fantasy football, get them in your lineups. If you need help, go to the Colts defense. If you picked them up last week like I recommended, play them again. The Titans give up the 10th most fantasy points to opposing defenses and special teams in the league. So here you have a nicked-up quarterback, and if he doesn't play, now you're going to get a rookie quarterback. I like that matchup. I'll take it any time of the week. If you are desperate for a tight end play, Dwayne Allen is an option. And other than that, I'm taking the Colts in a runaway win.
All right, the Carolina Panthers travel to the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens last week, and I lost my screen. Who did they play last week? Help me out here.
The Ravens?
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't the Panthers. They're playing the Panthers this week. Oh, who did they play?
I can't believe I lost.
You would do this to me.
I did. I would. Damn it.
We got something to talk about. Go ahead. You got to have something.
Hold on. I gotta call it up now. I gotta get it back now. They play Cleveland. They play Cleveland.
Cleveland. There we go.
Cleveland,
and they beat them.
They beat
by
them.
Field goal, I believe.
Yeah, 23-21. So, what do you expect from this Ravens team? What can you expect from this Carolina Panthers team that were part of that stink fest on Sunday night? It was just god awful. So, looking at how these teams execute, this really is, for these two teams where they are right now, the Panthers have forgotten to run the ball. The Ravens have forgotten how to cover people. So it goes back and forth, but the Panthers don't have a whole lot of wide receiver options here. So you're going to think I'm stupid right here. You're going to think I'm crazy. I'm picking this game based on whose offensive lines I think will do a better job in this game, and I'm going to pick the Baltimore Ravens at home. That's my whole basis for this pick.
Wow.
Because I can't. I could go back and forth and drive myself crazy. So this is what I'm using to separate the teams.
Yeah. Well, I think looking at this game, you have to first acknowledge the fact that the Panthers, that was a stinkfest last week against the Steelers. And you have to acknowledge that that game sort of showed some weaknesses in that team, especially their defense. And a team like the Ravens is going to study that film and find ways to basically replicate what happened last week and take advantage of those weaknesses. So I also like the Ravens because they're at home. They are a tough team at home and historically a tough team at home, and I just don't see the Panthers coming to town changing any of that. Now, this is another game that should be a low scoring game with the Ravens allowing 16.7 points per game, tied for number 6 in that category, and the Panthers allowing 19.3 points per game, ranked at number 10 in that category. And so automatically you can look at these two defenses and go, play them in fantasy. Just go ahead and do it. In terms of the quarterbacks, you want to avoid them. I know Cam Newton, for some people, it's their number one quarterback, so they may not have a decent backup, but I'm hoping that they do. This is a good week to bench him and avoid him if you can. I like D'Angelo Williams in the matchup. I want to say the Ravens in standard scoring give up 15 fantasy points. So to me, that's 100 yards in a TD. And if there's no TD, it's 100 yards. I'll take that this week with 6 teams on a bye from a running back. And D'Angelo Williams, he's a tough guy. He seems like he'll slowly but surely grind it out, get those yards, and if necessary, score a TD. I like Greg Olsen. As a matter of course, you start him every week. He is Cam Newton's go-to guy regardless of the matchup. And you've got to like Kelvin Benjamin because, look, even if he doesn't score, I think he could be a regular 100-yard receiver each and every week. For the Ravens, it's sort of a mixed bag. You can't really look at every single wide receiver and love them. Steve Smith, Torrey Smith, Owen Daniels. Steve Smith, to me, seems to be the best of the bunch. I mean, he's a tough guy, and every single game he's put up some relevant stats. And that's all we're looking for here in fantasy football. So if you had to pick between those three, you want Steve Smith to go. In terms of the running back situation, obviously it's sort of dicey because you've got Bernard Pierce who's coming off an injury. All indications are he'll be the starter, which usually suggests he'll get the majority of the touches. But then in the wings, you have Lorenzo Taliaferro, who had a great game last week. I want to say he had about 10 rushing attempts, 91 yards, and a score. I mean, averaging 9 yards per carry, that's ridiculous. So I like to think that he's going to get some work here, and potentially if Bernard Pierce is getting stuffed and Taliaferro is having any kind of luck, he might end up taking over that position. So look at Bernard Pierce as sort of a flex play, and Taliaferro is a very low-end flex play. If you're looking around scrambling and there's just no one else, plug him in and hope for the best. I like the Ravens at home.
I was hoping for a better prognosis on Taliaferro because I picked him up off my waiver wire in my league.
I did the same thing too, and fingers are crossed here, my friend. Fingers are crossed.
Last one before we take a break: Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Bucs traveling to Pittsburgh. Tampa is a rudderless ship right now, and yes, I'm not a big Lovie Smith fan, but this goes beyond Lovie Smith. Their offensive coordinator, Jeff Tedford, is taking a medical leave of absence. So, yes, I know there's other people that can call plays and it's the same game plan and all, but it's different when the guy in charge, the one that was handpicked by the head coach, is not there. Although, given Lovie Smith's previous history with offensive coordinators, maybe it's not a bad thing for the Bucs. But anyway, I digress. The Steelers they did their own version of Frampton Comes Alive the other week by running the ball up and down over the Carolina Panthers. Le'Veon Bell was making everyone who didn't draft him regret it, and even LeGarrette Blount got into the act there, believe it or not. So, which Steelers offense is going to show up? It was funny because if you listen to the Bob Sullivan show on Sunday night on Late Night Sports Radio, I was guest hosting there, and we were talking about the game, and I had looked away from my screen for a lengthy period of time, and I started talking about the Steelers' anemic offense, and I looked down, they put up 30-something points. I'm like, okay, well, I'll just shut up now. But they're at home. It's hard to pick against them, especially because Tampa has shown us nothing, especially defensively, which that's probably the most disappointing part of the Buccaneers this season is that their defensive play has been lackluster, and I'm picking the Steelers at home.
Oh, I like the Steelers at home, too. Last week could well be the game that makes their season. They looked awful the first 2 weeks, and then last week they were absolutely dominant against a very good Carolina Panthers defense. So, I mean, there's just no two ifs and or buts about it. And they're catching the Buccaneers, for them, an awful time. I mean, that was such an embarrassment last week. So my eyes are watching this game just to see how the Buccaneers respond. I think they'll respond okay because I think Mike Glennon, he wasn't really a part of that, so this isn't really on him. So that means he should be a capable leader, and he should be able to get the passing game going. But a guy like Doug Martin, who's been out for a couple weeks, or a guy like Bobby Rainey, who had a couple fumbles, those are guys you want to see how they do. Now, compare that to the Steelers that had this tremendously great win last week, but on Monday, their facilities looked like the MASH unit of the 4077. They had like three of their top defensive players down to injury, two linebackers, Ike Taylor, cornerback, and you sort of wonder how are they going to come out in this game. All that having been said, for the Bucs, I like Vincent Jackson. I know he's got a wrist fracture, but apparently he's practicing. He's got his wrist tape up. It must not be too serious, or the medical staff certainly wouldn't let him play. So I like him. I like him against a Steelers defense that no longer has Ike Taylor, and I like him with Mike Glennon. I mean, if you look at his numbers with Mike Glennon, I want to say when Mike Glennon entered, I want to say it was week 4 last year. He had 63 receptions for close to 1,000 yards and 7 TDs. I will take that any time of the week from a number 2 wide receiver in the modern NFL. In terms of the running backs, if you got Doug Martin, you got to play him. you absolutely have to play him. And I think if you have Bobby Rainey, he certainly makes for a third running back or a flex play, regardless of what